Continue this week in this series titled Growing in Christ. Pastor Becky shared with you last week about that, what the lessons that we could learn from the seed. Today, I want to learn with you what we can glean from the vine. What we can understand in this message that Jesus gives us, in this metaphor, if you will, that He is the vine, we the branch. And how do we then abide in Him? Because that's an important piece of this. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep those commands, you will abide in my love. Just as I kept my Father's command, He says, and abided in that love of God in me. To abide. To abide means to dwell in that place, to be healthy, growing, and branching out. That is the way of growth in our lives, and that's the growth that Christ calls us to as those branches. But what goes against that is disease, suffering from lack of care, lack of knowledge, lack of obedience, if you will, and thus lack of life. These are the things that keep us from abiding and growing and being healthy and branching out. Instead, we become diseased and withered. Back before Easter, Becky and I got a little bag that had a pot in it and had some wonderful daylilies. Daylilies are beautiful. They're really easy to grow, at least I thought. It's still in that little container. It's on the back porch. I've watered it. I put it outside. I figured that's all it takes, right? I went out there yesterday and looked at it, and it's all kind of brown and withered and laying over the side of the pots. I don't know what I've done. I don't have much of a green thumb. Oh, that would be the problem, or at least part of it. I don't even know how to identify a plant, let alone grow it. Thank you, dear. I'm glad you're here. It didn't have that little marker in the pot, tells you what it is, right? Well, either way, it's dead. Let's just get to the point. Why? Because they were probably diseased, definitely lacking of care, and as just now evidenced, lack of knowledge, lack of obedience, thus lack of life. We are not called, though, to be like that. We're called to growth. Jesus says it in this text that we're called to grow, to bear fruit. Fruit is the result of that growth. We are called in this text to carry a certain burden. We're not called to like. We're called not to be like Jesus, but the text says this is my command, that you will love one another as I have loved you, that we are called to love as Jesus has loved. Abide in my love. To abide is to bear patiently. I love how the dictionary defines it as well. It says it is to endure without yielding, to withstand or to abide the onrush of the enemy. See, the thing that I think we miss is sometimes we interpret abide to simply mean all we got to do is stay connected to Jesus. Yes, indeed, that is the first part of it. To abide means to connect or to dwell in the presence of or to be with God. However, abide goes much deeper than that as well, and it is to abide or to be present with or to stay close to Jesus, to be connected to God in those moments of great difficulty, when the enemy presses in on us, when we have to bear with patience, even though we'd like to say, God, we're done. I'd like to gather today and say, God, I'm done with the clouds and the rain, at least for now, but we must abide. Do we come out, I'm glad you're all here, when the sun is shining and it's easy to do so, or do you come out even in the rain? And here you are. We abide in the difficulty. Why? Because to truly understand love, I believe that we have to understand what it is to love even in the most difficult of circumstance. Love, as it is defined by our faith, is both a revered remedy for all that ails us, and it is, I believe, an underemployed practice. To say that the answer to the world's problems is simply for people to just love each other a little more. If we could have a little more love, as the old Beatles song says, it's all about that love. But this can sometimes feel a bit trite at the same time as it feels powerful. It sounds wonderful and grand. We could argue that all we really need is to love each other more. We could argue this with consternation even and say, there's just got to be a better way for us to share life and love with one another. But when we sit eyeball to eyeball with the other, especially the other one who is cantankerous or obnoxious or difficult or unloving and seemingly unlovable, it is anything but an easy task. And that's where the love in our lives hits that difficulty. It's where the rubber, though, meets the road, as they say. Love. See, we have a hard time sometimes with love. I share this a lot of times in sermons that I give or the homily that I offer at a wedding ceremony, because isn't that a time when we really want to talk about love? And it's a good thing to describe that love. Often we use 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, where it talks about that perfect love, that love is patient and not arrogant, envious, boastful, or rude, that doesn't insist upon its own way, but it hopes all things, believes all things, endures all things. That's a glorious idea. It's a grand concept, but it's difficult to fulfill. You see, that's what's called agape love. The challenge with love in our world, in our English language at least, is we have just the one word. And we can talk about that love being applied to a lot of things. I can talk about how I love my wife and I love the Chicago Cubs, but I hope those two aren't synonymous or the same. I'm getting the raised eyebrow. It better not be. In the scriptures, in the Greek, one of the things that I often really appreciate is that there are many words for love. Just three of them I want to highlight. One, first, is that first love, eros. It's a Greek word, and it's in the scriptures in different places. And an eros is, if you will think about that as, in our English language, erotic. It's the erotic love. It's the love that welled up in Becky when from across the room she saw me and thought, whoa. Oh, sorry. Wait a minute, reverse that. So when I saw her from across the room, I thought, whoa, I got to get to know her, right? That's that love, that's that physical attraction. There's something that's appealing, and we want to get together with each other and be close to one another. And that's a good love. But that's in a lot of ways where love begins, but it doesn't end there, or at least it shouldn't. And unfortunately, in our world, sometimes we've degraded that idea of love so much that all it is empty. But that starts for us. It plants that seed. It brings us together, if you will. And then it matures into another one of those words in the scriptures called phile. We think of that in the name Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia is what? The city of, yes, brotherly love. The city of brotherly love. It is a familial, a familiar, a family love. It is that love that grows, that once we come together and we're in proximity, that we spend time with one another and we get to know each other and we nurture that relationship, and out of it grows then this communion together, a brotherly or sisterly or familial love. And that's a good love. It's a depth. Indeed, but yet it doesn't end there as well. It goes on, and that's what we read about in 1 Corinthians 13, and that is then this agape love. It's a wonderful word. We throw it around in the church a lot of times, agape, and we read it in the Corinthians text. But do we really stop and ponder the depth of that love? A love that is patient, kind, is not envious, arrogant, boastful, or rude. It doesn't insist upon its own way. It hopes all things, believes all things, endures everything. Do we love that way with one another? Even when we disagree, when we're frustrated, when we disappoint one another, when we're discouraged, do we yet love? That's what Christ calls us to abide in his love, to dwell connected to enough to Jesus that when we face the difficulties in life, we can still hold fast to one another and abide in that love. That's what Christ calls us to. There will be more than a few times when we in our own lives won't want to dwell in that. We'll want to be more like Jeremiah in Jeremiah 9 verse 2, where he says, "Oh, that I had the desert a traveler's lodging place. Oh, that I might leave my people and go away from them." You ever feel that way? Like sometimes you just got to get away from people. Jeremiah felt that way. Or sometimes you just wish some people would get away from you. See, those are the places that our love is challenged. When we're called to love, another word we often use in the church, unconditionally, without condition. I'll love you if, ... Unconditional love. The writer, theologian, and a Presbyterian minister, Frederick Bucher, once observed this. He said, in the Christian sense, love is not primarily an emotion, but it is an act of the will. That in those places when it's not easy to love, that's when Christ calls us to be even more closely connected to Him, to know of God's unconditional love for us, that we might love as an act of will, to say, it's not easy, I don't feel inclined to, I don't want to, but yet I will love. I will the way of love in this life. But I say to you, listen, Jesus reminded us, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. That's what Jesus reminds us of in His words. If you love as those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good for you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much as they can. But love your enemy, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful then, just as God is merciful. That's agape love. I'm here to tell you, I haven't learned how to do that yet. Let's just be honest. As human beings, we sin and fall short. But it's by the grace of God that we are forgiven, even in those places where we're still working at it. I've spent the last almost 10 months now living apart most of the week from Becky. Becky and Devin and Godfrey, Zach and I here, you know that. I shared this last week down in the Family Life Center. It's been interesting that how I've discovered that there are little ways that remind me of what it means when you're separated like that. Even though she comes home most weekends and we talk every day, we're connected still in some ways, but still that proximity has an effect. Becky comes home on the weekends, and Devin a lot of times with him or with her. And when they get home, I find that it's good. It's pretty good. There's some challenges sometimes, I mean, like she said, when she moves back home, she's going to rearrange the whole kitchen because I put the dishes and stuff in the wrong spot. I'm like, well, that's where Zach and I, we've adjusted that. We live with that. I come into the bedroom when one of the first weekends that she comes home and get ready to go to bed. And in our bedroom, we have a nightstand on one side. If you're facing the bed, it's on the left side of the nightstand. And that's where I sleep, because then I lay my phone there, and I can take my glasses off and lay them on the nightstand. And there's a lamp on the nightstand. And so I come in to go to bed, and Becky is in my spot. 25 years she slept on the left side. She says, that's my spot. I said, no, I sleep there. The nightstand, I need that. And so we had to decide, how are we going to do this? And so we've decided to give shared custody to that side. No, let's be honest. I learned how to sleep on the other side. But isn't it interesting, those practical applications for a grand idea? I know that we're called to love one another unconditionally, and it's easy for us to talk, we'll get through this 10 months, it won't be a problem at all. And then when that rubber meets the road, when the practical becomes real and it's practically applied, we find that there are difficulties. And we face the reality of those difficulties. But that's what we're called to do in this text with Jesus, and that is abide. Abide even in the difficult places. Abide with one another. Hold fast to each other, even in your disagreements, even in the difficulties, in the struggles, and especially in those. Because it's in those places that God is pruning us and preparing us and growing us that we might bear fruit. And that's a worthy goal for us, to abide in the love that Christ dwells in with us, that we might grow by it and learn from it. That's the one thing, in my estimation. One of my favorite movies is City Slickers, an old 80s film. That bears my generation. You remember the movie? Jack Palance, known as Curly, and Mitch Robbins, played by Billy Crystal. The three New Yorkers go out west and they they go on a cattle drive, right? And it's a wonderful story. And while they're riding along, Billy Crystal's character, Mitch, and Curly, played by Jack Palance, are riding on their horses side by side. And Mitch is looking, and he pauses, and he says, "Do you know what the secret of life is, Curly?" to Mitch. Mitch, Crystal's character, says, "Nope, what is it?" Curly replies, "One thing. Just one thing," with his gloved hand in the air wagging. One thing. You stick to that and everything else doesn't mean a thing. Mitch says, "Wow, one thing? That's great, but what is the one thing?" Curly grins, smiles a little, and says, "That is what you turkeys got to figure out." His words, not mine. That's what you turkeys have got to figure out. See, Jesus shares the one thing his disciples will need to do and be in order to share a God-shaped life, and that is love one another as I have loved you. Bear with one another. Christ calls us to bear with one another in all circumstances. And I hope that we can learn that lesson from the vine as the branches that are called to grow much fruit.